There we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining. 2 months ago today, Lara put out a beautiful book called A Mother Held. And we are here today to celebrate that wonderful work. And I am just so blown away, one by her writing, but also her generosity of spirit. She is so generous with her writing and so kind and loving, and is willing to talk about the hard things, which is not an easy feat to be vulnerable. But we're so grateful just for her courage to do that. And on behalf of Calipress, I just want to say thank you and congratulations as well. Of course, you're part of the team, which is wonderful. And I hope that you are congratulating yourself as well, because it is definitely something we're celebrating. But I would love to just kick off with a little bit of an intro from you so people can hear more about you and all of the wonderful creative works that you are doing, because you do so many things. So yeah, just tell us about you and all the things that you do.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I am a mom to three little boys, two of which are twins. I am married. We live in the middle of nowhere, but it's pretty beautiful next to the ocean and on the other side, forest. Yeah, I've been writing publicly for about 7 years now, but I would say I've been writing as long as I can remember, since at least grade two, when I was pretty bad at writing. And my teacher told my mom she needs to practice at home because we don't have time here in the classroom for her to spend hours at her desk trying to figure out how to bring a story from start to finish. Um, so yeah, I love nature. I love writing. I love what I get to do. And along with writing, I do web design and I also do editing, two of my other favorite creative outlets, but I'd say writing is probably my favorite.
I love that. And I am so curious, just before we dive in and hear your beautiful words from in your own voice, which is wonderful. How did you start working with Calipress?
So I had submitted a few years ago, I submitted for the first time to Calipress. I think I had submitted first for their blog, and then I also had a piece in the literary journal. And so me and Samantha kind of got to know each other through working together that way. And for those of you who don't know, Leslie Bustard used to help out a lot with Calipress. And when she passed away, I knew not only Samantha would be grieving the loss of Leslie, I knew also she needed help because Leslie did so much for Calipress. And so I quickly jumped in and just said, hey, like whatever you need, please let me know how I can be of help, what I can do. Feel free to send me stuff to edit or I'm willing to do whatever I can to be of help to you. And so yeah, I started working for her just on like as a needed basis. And then shortly after that, she asked me if I would like to come on staff. And I started as a copy editor, mostly for the blog. And then when she wanted to start publishing books, I was obviously so excited about that. It was my dream to help out with publishing books. And so now I'm more of a senior editor position where I help edit manuscripts and also help with any other logistics that need help with.
I love that. It's so funny because I shared a story on Instagram earlier today and I said, you just had a heart of service. And I love that that's even part of your story in reaching out to Samantha, who's the founder of Calipress. It's just a beautiful example of all the ways that you jump in and how you're generous with your gifts and with your time. But yeah, I would love to hear A Mother Held in your words. I know you've selected a beautiful reading, so why don't you go ahead and get us started with that.
Perfect. I'm gonna pull up the digital version so that way I'm not trying to hold a book and then hiding my face. Assuming it will work. But yeah, I'm going to read today from one of the chapters, one of the essays. And considering that it's beautiful spring weather, I think, that read the piece I wrote about nature, about beautiful and fearsome, yet how also God can be at work in nature, and how it can also be a big part of motherhood as well. One more. Okay. So I'll start with a quote from Charlotte Mason. She's one of my favorite people to read. Most people know her from homeschooling, but I see her also as simply somebody you should read as a parent as well. So I started the chapter with this quote from her. One thing a mother will do, but very rarely and with tender filial reverence, she will point to some lovely flower or gracious tree, not only as a beautiful work, but a beautiful thought of God, in which we may believe he finds continual pleasure, in which he is pleased to see his human child rejoice in. Such a seed of sympathy with the divine thought sown in the heart of the child is worth many of the sermons the man may listen to hereafter, much of the divinity he may read. And that comes from Charlotte Mason, Home Education. And now I will read the chapter. The sun flickered through the moving curtain as I pressed up from the bed to the sound of soft giggles. I ran a hand through my short hair with a sleepy smile and padded across the hall to the room where my two children sleep. As I cracked the door open, they both popped their heads up from behind the unmade bed and beamed at me. Who wants to cuddle? I whispered. They both scrambled on top of the wrinkled sheets and crawled over to the bed closest to me. As I lay on my side, one child curved his back into my belly and nestled his head under my chin. The other stood in front of us from the floor, his big grin stretching and creasing his face. How are you this morning? I asked, holding his hand. As he giggled bashfully and shook his head, a dark dot in the crease of his ear caught my eye. I held his arm a bit more firmly and tugged his body closer to me. I propped myself up on my elbow and gently pulled his ear closer to my face. A moose tick had latched itself onto the inside of his earlobe. I cringed as I ripped it from his skin. The snuggles were forced to end abruptly as I took the nasty critter to the bathroom to be flushed. Watching it spiral down the porcelain bowl, the thought flickered through me that we could simply remain inside rather than go outdoors. Ticks pass diseases, dangerous diseases. Was it worth the risk? Checking each night didn't seem to matter because I somehow always missed one and found it hours later already attached. I couldn't protect my 3 children from contracting Lyme disease. I shook my head as if the thought could fall out. Unreasonable, I knew it, but could I prevent it any other way? Force them to wear long sleeves all summer long with pants tucked into their socks? Keep them out of the woods and tall grass at all costs? A summer prior, I almost swore off outdoor play. With an adventurous child who loved to shove rocks and handfuls of sand into his mouth, images of him choking and me struggling to clear his airway in time filled my head. I would lose him, one of my beloved sons I received after 2 miscarriages. He still put rocks in his mouth, and now the ticks were worse than they ever had been. My arms aren't long enough, my eyes not quick enough, my ears not vigilant enough to catch it all. I can't save him. I'm too limited. Is it worth it? Of course, little boys who love the outdoors won't be convinced of rules like these, and I knew it was unreasonable of me to ask. Later that day, we played outside in the sun, laying in the tall weeds my husband had yet to weed whack around the slide and swings. I knew a pre-nap tick check was on the schedule after lunch. When I called them to the steps, the 3 boys ran like little chicks through the porch and flapped into their seats at the table, the twins needing a bit of help climbing into their booster seats. As I snapped up their buckles and slid the trays into place, I smiled at their grimy, blackened feet. I could see each swirl in their heels like lines on a map from the dirt embedded in their soft skin. Their toenails finished with ragged black lines at the tip where dirt collected underneath. I recognized this all too well. I knew another child whose heels appeared dipped in charcoal every summer. Your sheets are full of dirt, my mother said, pulling the new fitted sheet down on the mattress. How do they get so muddy? Are you wearing shoes out there? I told her yes and showed her my flip-flops with the indented and brown heel for proof. She shook her head and laughed. You need to wash your feet each night before getting into bed from now on. Me up under the pine cabinet that held the sink. I sat cross-legged on the wooden counter and turned the tap on both hot and cold, my hands waiting beneath the flow until it reached the right temperature. Then I grabbed a face cloth in the basket behind me and rubbed the bar of soap over it and stuck my feet in the white sink. Swirls of gritty dirt swirled around the porcelain, sometimes splashing up in the mirror-like faucet. I scrubbed my feet until they appeared peachy again, but there always seemed to remain a sliver of a fragment of dirt in the swirls of my heels. My mom believed in the power and importance of nature, and she sent me out there anytime I could. When I was younger, she built snowmen and castles in the snow with me, or brought me with her to arrange flower beds. We spent many evenings in the horse barn, saddling up and riding through the paths in the woods. As I got older, she let me play further from the house and explore the ponds and forests close to our home, including a white bridge for me to cross over the stream that tumbled into a waterfall. She didn't like the blackened sheets, but she knew what was most important: a life spent outdoors, even when bits of hay and slime from the pond accompanied it. She knew it mattered, not just so that her daughter could distinguish between a frog and a toad, but for something more important, for a life lived well and flourishing, like those tall trees I climbed in our front yard. This year, I read Home Education by Charlotte Mason in preparation for homeschooling. I expected it to be a drawn out, slavish work of necessity. Though passionate about homeschooling, the thought of actually following through overwhelmed me. I also figured someone who wrote 6 volumes at the turn of the 20th century couldn't have written very compelling words. Yet it turned out to awaken a passion for the wonders of motherhood in me. In this volume, Mason dedicated an entire chapter to the importance of a life lived out of doors. She wrote, quote, "Let them once get in touch with nature, and a habit is formed which will be a source of delight through life. We were all meant to be naturalists, each in his own degree, and it is inexcusable to live in a world so full of the marvels of plants and animals and to care for none of these things." End quote. Mason considered it a pitiable idea that a child may go his entire life and not be able to recognize a bumblebee. In practice, I learned first from my mother the need for a life of grass between our toes, dirt smudged on our faces, and tree bark glued to our hands. Rather than making trips to the zoo, my mother caught me by the shoulders and pointed out the window whenever an otter, beaver, porcupine, or squirrel toddled through our property. She taught me not only how to catch frogs and snakes, but how to respect them too. I walked with my oldest son one day along the forest edge of our yard, and I asked him questions about what we saw. What do these pine needles feel like? What color are these flowers? And so on. As we passed by a group of mushrooms, I asked him if he thought maybe grasshoppers used them as beds. As the words left my mouth, a memory came rushing in like a wind at my back of my younger self, maybe 5 or older, walking with my grandmother through the forest. We passed by a stump with chips of a pine cone on top, and she slowed me down in front of it and pointed at it with her frail hand. "You see that there, Lara?" she said. "That's where some squirrels had a good meal together." With that memory, another one pulled in my mind. My mother walking me through the forest paths in autumn, where our horse trails were completely covered in gold and orange. We had a bag to collect leaves to press in the big books at home, the same books where we had pressed tiny violets from the previous summer. She taught me to notice the beauty around me. She never read or wrote poetry, but she had taught me to see the poetry of nature as she dug her hands into the earth to array flowers in just the right way. All these years later, Charlotte Mason taught me the philosophy behind what had been ingrained in into my nature all those years ago. As anxiety crept into my heart about all the dangers that lurked outside, their lessons came together in my mind to remind me of the greater work that comes from a life lived out of doors. Mason, however, added another layer my mother had yet to see: that nature forms greater adoration, faith, and righteous fear in the human heart that restlessly longs for its creator. And I believe God used the faithfulness of my mother to build that faith in me for my own life. And that's the end.
It's such a lovely chapter, and you use such poetic language, which is such a gift in writing when it comes through. Just about the wonder of the outdoors and pointing out the small things and building imagination, but also knowing that even that same outdoors that can be so wonderful also has its own dangers too. Yeah, just lovely, lovely language and such great storytelling. And it was wonderful to hear it in your voice too, which is such a
Well,
gift.
thank you. I appreciate that.
I love that. Well, I do have a handful of questions for you before we jump into like a live Q&A where we can open it up to everyone. And yes, it was challenging to condense it down. I feel like I could ask you so many questions after reading your book. But I will start with this one. There was a line in the very, very beginning that you used, and it made me stop and think, and it was, As I have found eyes to see my Father at work in my story with a backward glance, my prayer is that you would learn how to see God right now, not just in hindsight. And it really just struck me because I think that's one of the challenges of faith is seeing God's right now work in our current circumstances. And you put that so beautifully in that sentence. So I guess my question would be, what did that process of reflection and seeing look like? And what wisdom would you offer when we're struggling to see the character of God in our current circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's taking that pause at times. And often in my prayer life, it can look like asking for so many things, but then I rarely take that pause to sit back and reflect and think on all the ways that God's answered those many requests I've made over the days and weeks and years. I was saying to one person that as I wrote this book, it was encouragement to me in the midst of the things I was currently going through as I reviewed all these various stories from my own past and saw God was faithful then, and I know he'll be faithful now, just as I saw him be faithful back then. And I think sometimes it takes that pause, which we're not very good at, especially in our fast paced world. At least I know I'm not. And always worrying about the future and always thinking about what's next. But I think it takes that quiet pausing to reflect and think and just think about even the little things we asked for. I was just talking to another older lady in my church who was visiting me, and I was asking her about her prayer life because she's somebody who I admire. Whenever I listen to her pray or talk about her prayer life, you can see how deep her faith is. And it just brings me so much joy. And so I wanted to learn more about her faith. And part of it is that she prays over everything. Like she misplaces her phone and she prays about it. And then she happens to find it at, the store she didn't believe it was at. She searched and searched Walmart and it was at a different store. And she says, but I thank God that, somebody could have stole it. Someone, like anything could have happened. It could have got broken. It could have fell out in the parking lot and been smashed by a car wheel. She's like, but I found it. And it's because I prayed. And I think too, we can so easily say, oh, well, yeah, it was just a coincidence. Well, yeah, of course it was going to happen that way. And that's just the way it happened to fall into place. But then remembering, no, I prayed about that. And if God cares about every sparrow that falls and cares to number the hairs on my head, yes, he cares about the little things too. And just trying to take note of those graces and those answers to prayer.
That's such a beautiful point of just we do get caught up sometimes in the big things. And I think especially even in prayer, I know my brain can automatically go to, hey God, let's tackle this big thing in my life. And then I miss those little things. So I like just that reminder to stop and notice the small things and to also bring those things to God because he does care. And I love that you talked about the pause and how even writing this book gave you that opportunity to reflect. And that's why one of the reasons I love writing so much, because I feel like somehow
Mhm.
that just draws out things you didn't even know you knew, which I think is a grace and gift of God as well, that He draws things out of that deeper well as you're writing. And it's just such a beautiful practice. Yeah, I love that. So you also talk about anxiety. That is in the subtitle of the book. Um, and it's not an easy thing to talk about, but you talk about it in such poignant words. And something you said as well was talking about always thinking there's going to be some milestone moment where you're like, oh, when this happens, I won't struggle with anxiety anymore. And that there's always just that one day that you're hoping for. And as someone who has struggled with anxiety, I can definitely attest to that is something that is always there, kind of lurking or thinking, well, when I'm in my 20s, this won't be a problem. Well, when I get married, this won't be a problem. But somehow it just always rears its ugly head. Um, and you talk about it so beautifully. And I would love to know what kind of gentle words of wisdom would you give to someone who is really wading through that fear hoping it'll get better with the next milestone, but maybe it's not. Or even to someone wrestling in their faith because that fear won't go away and they have those questions, whether it's in motherhood or anything else.
Something that I've been reflecting on a lot lately. Um, Part of my angst growing up with my own anxiety was, God has all these commands in the Bible. Do not fear, do not be anxious. And whenever I read those words, I heard them in a scathing, angry voice and a demand and like, how dare you fear when I take care of you? Like, what's wrong? Why can't you just get over this? That's how I thought God viewed my anxiety. And in recent years, I've come to read from both Ed Welch and Tim Lane. Both of them describe it in such a comforting way that they say, as you'd say to your child wakes up from a nightmare and you go to them and they tell you they're scared or they're scared of the dark or maybe they're scared of dinosaurs or whatever the case might be. And you don't look at them and say, my goodness, child, you know I take care of you. Have I ever failed to protect you? Why on earth are you scared? Like we don't chastise our children when they're scared, but we come alongside them and we say, you don't have to be afraid because I am with you and I love you and I'm going to protect you. And in the same way, God, he doesn't get angry with us and wag a finger at us like, how dare you be afraid? He comes alongside and invites us. You can trust me. I am good. I love you. So no matter how long you struggle with this fear, no matter how much it seems like this is never going to go away, why, like, and you start to think maybe this will be something I face the rest of my life, don't stop coming to the Father because that's what his call is about. It's not come on and hurry up, get over this fear and this anxiety. His call is, I am here for you. I love you. You can bring your burdens to me because I will take care of you and I will be there for you.
That's so beautiful. I would be interested to know, I'm not a mom, but how does becoming a mom shift your perspective of God, of his character, and of his love?
I think it makes you realize just how deep and wide his love really is when you recognize just how much you care for these little people and want to protect them and how much it grieves your heart when they hurt. And then you realize, oh my goodness, my love is only a mere shadow of what God's love is for me. And it really gives you that peace and that rest and comfort to remember, oh yeah, I'm an imperfect parent and I love my kids this much. God loves me even more than that. And that's one of the big ways parenthood has really, really changed the way I view God.
Yeah, it's such profound imagery, and I've heard that from many people that it is a love like no other. So it is crazy to think about that your heart can just expand that much, and suddenly it just dawns on you like, oh my goodness, what must God feel? Um, Something else you talk about that I really love is that picture of motherhood that I think we all kind of carry into that experience because I know, even as someone who's not a mom, when I close my eyes and I think about it, I have a picture of what it's going to look like. And even though I don't bake, I'm probably baking homemade pies and like the perfect mother and doing all the things. And in reality, it's probably not going to look that way. Um, but that shattering of expectations can be very disillusioning just as we walk through life and with our faith, with motherhood, with ourselves, it can kind of make us really call into question a lot of those things. And so I think you talk about that difference very well. So what would you want to say to the woman who's walking through pregnancy and early motherhood and might be thinking, gosh, it wasn't supposed to be this way?
I think remembering that a lot of the images we see of it doesn't even have to just be of motherhood, but a lot of the images we see of life in general are taken in those perfect moments. They're taken, the Instagram photos, they're taken at the most prime moment when the children are nicely playing or when the house is spotless. Those kinds of things. A friend of mine did a picture like that to kind of make fun of it. She set up this one little tiny corner of her living room and snapped a picture. Then she stepped back and took a picture of the whole room, and there's like Lego everywhere and train tracks and unmade beds and all the things. And she did it to show like this is only a little portion that you've seen. People rarely show all the ragged edges and all the mess and disorder of whatever season it is they're in. But we see the little neat and tidy and perfect pictures. And for me, it was, seeing the cute flat lays that women did with their babies as every month, like, oh, they're 8 months now, they're 9 months now. And I never did those because I'm like, I don't know when I'd have time. And you know what? My child screams too much for me to even do that. Like, it would not be a pleasant picture for anybody of my child wailing and all red in the face. So I think pause, like also just talking to people that are close to you who are in that season, whether it's, you're moving into motherhood or you're moving into marriage or whatever it might be that you're moving into the new season of your life. Talk to people who you're close with who have been in it and get the full picture of what it really looks like. And I think for me, one of the big ways that I was helped was I actually worked for a mom who it was my pastor's wife several years ago, and she had twin boys, and she had a middle daughter and then a boy who was school age, who she was homeschooling. So newborn twins, a 3-year old, and homeschooling a 5-year old and spending an entire morning or an entire afternoon in that house, I very quickly got a picture of this is what motherhood actually looks like. It's not all the cute pastel colored wooden toys. It's not, beautiful hair and cute little frilly dresses. There is spit up everywhere, and your house starts to smell like spoiled milk. And there are diapers every time you turn around. Like you just change them, and then there's another diaper to change. And there are unmade beds, and there's piles of laundry, and there's stains on that laundry that will never come out, and so forth. But I also saw the joy of a mom and a husband and the other children in the midst of that, even though things were a mess, even though things weren't perfect, even though supper was late, and all of those things. I saw real life. I didn't see just this small corner that somebody had cropped of their beautiful home or of motherhood. I saw what it really was. And I saw how, you know what, the cookies don't always get baked. Or sometimes you have a hot meal because somebody brought it to you. Or sometimes you go and buy the store bought cookies or the store bought bread because you did not have time to knead that loaf. And it was really a comfort and help to me. And I attribute much of what I've learned about motherhood to those years I spent before I ever had kids working for that mom and seeing what real marriage and motherhood looks like in the everyday.
That's so powerful. And I feel like that's what's so important, one, about community, but also about people like you who are willing to share their sides of the stories that aren't always that perfect, like Instagram corner. Is that I think when people do that and invite you into those real experiences, people around the world go, I'm not the only one. You realize that no one is really walking through an experience isolated. There are so many people who are walking through the same things, probably thinking the same things and saying, "Oh my gosh, this is chaos. What am I doing?" And I think that's what's so important about people being willing to share those experiences because when you're in it and you feel alone, I mean, it's just gotta feel so isolating and yeah, just to be struggling with, I'm sure, the guilt and all the things that can come with that. But it's so freeing to say, you know what? This is what it is, and I am the mom that I'm supposed to be, and here we are, and we're going to make the best of it, and I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I think that it's so important when you're in those seasons, those difficult seasons, or whatever they might be, to simply know. I am not alone. I am not the only one feeling this. It helps you move a bit steadier.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is my last question before we kind of switch gears into some of the more book related promotion, publishing kind of side of things. But as someone who's not a mom yet, but is at an age where friends are having children and kind of entering into that season of life, what does it look like to love the moms in our life really well?
I think one thing I think moms can never hear enough is simply, you're doing a great job. Like every time someone tells that to me, it's like moment like, hey, don't mind me. I just need to catch my breath for a minute. it's 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 such an encouragement, I think, for moms to hear you're doing a good job because so often we feel like we're failing. And simply, I think being there for them, whether it's, coming for those visits, because oftentimes you do feel stuck in the house that it's hard to get out with kids. So those visits, or maybe it's a home cooked meal because it's hard for them to sit down and get a meal cooked. Or maybe it's doing laundry for them. I often say, reach out to them and see what do they need, because some people are like, don't touch my laundry. I've got a system. I need to do this myself. But other people would love to have you help them fold some laundry. But I do think even if you feel limited on time and resources, simply visiting them and being with them and letting them know you're doing an awesome job and you're a great mom can just mean so much to them.
That's so helpful to hear because I was talking to a friend and she recently became a mom in the last year or two, and um something she told me was so profound, and it was, honestly, I didn't even know what I needed. But there were mom friends who came alongside me who knew. And so it's just so helpful to hear your wisdom because before you're in it, you just don't know. But then there is that gift of people who say, I've got it. I know some of the things you're gonna need. So it's just so helpful to hear your wisdom about that.
I'm glad that's helpful.
Yeah. So diving into the publishing a little bit, because I'm sure we will have some writers who probably watch this back and they will be very interested to know, but you actually wrote about this book getting rejected in the early days of sending out a proposal. And I think you talked about even there being a 6 year gap in between those original days and today. But I would love to know, you talk about getting rejections, which is just so tough in general, especially if you care about what you're doing and the message that you're trying to get out there. How did you remain hopeful? And what would you say to a writer who's realizing that it's probably harder to get their book published than they realize, or that it's going to take longer than they originally wanted?
Yeah, this book has kind of many iterations. It was at first just, you know, pre motherhood, living with anxiety and trying to reconcile it with my faith. And then, bits of motherhood kind of got woven in as I became a mom. And after a while of it just getting rejected and rejected and rejected, I kind of just set it aside and said, you know what, God, if you want this book to be, you will make it happen. But as of right now, it's not working. And maybe it's because I'm not ready to write it. There must be a reason why it keeps getting rejected. And I'm just going to lay it aside and keep doing what the next right thing is, as I think Elizabeth Elliot talks about. And so, yeah, I was just pressing and seeing, okay, I'm going to work on my freelance career of writing art various places and, writing more on this topic that I care so much about, and maybe gaining some more experience and some more time learning about it myself so that if I ever do get to write this book, I have more to say and more wisdom to share, because writing is such a patient work. It requires so much patience because everything moves so slowly. And I read a stat recently that majority of writers will write 4 manuscripts before they actually get one published, which is a terrifying and crushing reality to think about sometimes. To think I have to write 4 manuscripts before one gets published. but it also remembering that none of that is wasted. You know, all those book proposals I wrote, all those sample chapters I wrote, all the times I tried to create this book, none of that was wasted. God used that to form me not only as a writer, but as a person, you know, to develop that perseverance and developing my skill and getting better at crafting words. Never consider anything you do as a writer as wasted, even when it gets rejected by everyone in the publishing world. It was just more practice. You know, they talk about going to the gym and just doing those reps over and over again. It's just more and more practice and growing stronger.
It's so wise because one, I think there's the temptation of, oh, I have this book idea. This is it. Like there's that eagerness of diving in because you care and God does give you those ideas and those seeds of ideas that you're supposed to work on and flesh out. But then when it's not happening, there is that temptation of crossing a line of, well, I guess I should just give up. So having that mindset of, oh, this is really about patience. I just have to keep working. Maybe it's not this idea right now. Maybe I set it down, but it's not gone, not wasted. I'm gonna keep working on it. I'm gonna keep moving forward. And so I think I wish I could remember who said it, but someone said that living is writing. Um,
Mm.
Something along those lines. And so I think when people get so discouraged by not seeing the results and progress, they forget that they're actually doing the work right now while they're living. And so there is that process of going through before you can get to that side of, oh, I'm holding a book in my hands. Um, which is a very great segue into my next question. What was the catalyst for saying, okay, this book is ready now? Because I think I have seen on the other side of the publishing curtain now that there are some manuscripts that come in a little bit too early because they're eager, and you can tell just sometimes the time would serve it really well. And sometimes that's all it is, just the time. So I would love to know, just in your wisdom and your words, how do you know it's ready and it's time to pick that project back up?
For me, I think I share this in the prologue of the book. I was a girl had reached out to me who was newly married and she was newly pregnant and she was struggling with anxiety. And as she sat across from me on the couch, I saw myself in her as she talked about her anxieties and her fears. And I just thought, yes, this is who I was. In that moment, I thought, I wish I could take everything I've ever written on motherhood and anxiety and faith and give it to her, not to like further scare her, but as a way of saying, here, and he is good even in the midst of this. And I thought, is the time. And even if I just compile everything only for her, then so be it. And so I did start that process. I was compiling all the stuff I'd ever written. And then I started having more ideas and adding to it. And it was at that time, this is why I say this book was 100% God in so many ways. It was at that exact time that Samantha reached out to me as one of her editors and said, I want to start publishing books. And it was so ironic because I was in the midst of working on this manuscript. And so I sent her an email back and said, I know we are just starting out this book idea, and it's totally okay if you don't want to publish it. Do not feel pressured just because I'm your editor. This is my book idea. Would you be interested in it? And she was so excited about the idea. And yes. And so it was really almost when I was getting all this rejection, she said to me, she said, you know what, maybe Lara, someday, you know, when you have more years of motherhood underneath you, maybe then this book will be something that people will be interested in. And that's what happened, that with those more years of motherhood, I'm still not a very experienced mother. I've got 5 years under my belt, but it really was those more years of maturing and God working everything out in his good timing.
I love that. You cut out a little bit for me in the middle, but I just love the God connecting those dots with Samantha and just the timing of, oh, you're working on this book and you're pulling it back out, and her saying, which is just so funny and so God, like, you know what? I think I want to do this thing. And so it's just amazing to see how even in his working out of dreams in everyone's lives, how there are those kind of connecting dots and overlaps that are so beautifully intertwined and so perfectly fit. Because I know just I came on, I think, right when your book was about to come out, but I know Samantha was really excited about it. And so it just seemed like the perfect fit, and it was amazing to even be on the tail end of the process of that and to be involved with it because it did just seem like such a perfect, almost magical partnership. So it was really wonderful just to get to experience that. And um, yeah, just again, that timepiece, and what a great word from your friend of saying, just keep going. It might not be right now, but hold on to it. And so what a wonderful testament to your faith and your faithfulness that you held on, because I think it's easy to let go of ideas like that. But I do believe that creativity, and especially creative ideas that are God-given, are just so important and so need to be stewarded and tended to. And so good for you for holding on to that. And that's why we get to be here celebrating you today. Um, okay, so one question I did have was, how did that time change your book? You've kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'd be curious to know, and I think other writers will want to know, is how much did it change from that original idea to now? Because I do think, and I'm guilty of it as well, we get stuck on the original idea and aren't willing to change and edit. So I'd be curious to know, like, how many iterations of that book were there until you finally got to, oh, this is the thing that's going to be published.
There were countless iterations. Like I can't even. So the first one was simply my story of with anxiety and trying to reconcile it with my faith. Then it became more of a Christian living book, so less memoir, more of, you know, pairing God's character with the various facets of anxiety. And then it became, maybe it's more of discernment and trying to understand anxiety. And then that one failed. So there were at least three major iterations of this book. And time, I think, one, simply understanding scripture better and growing my understanding of the knowledge of God. Because there were still lots of things I believed back then that weren't true about anxiety and faith. And so God had to work those out in me first. And then there were also simply my own experience of facing anxiety. And one of the things, motherhood really, a new whole face of anxiety came out. But God, and then seeing God lead me through that and seeing his faithfulness in the midst of it. And truly, not just simply having the knowledge of he is sovereign and good, but watching it play out of, yeah, he truly is sovereign and good. And those are some of the great pieces that made the book what it is today. It wasn't simply me looking at scripture and saying, this is what the Bible says, just believe it. It was, this is what the Bible says. I have seen it. I have experienced it. I hope that you can now see it in your life too.
Yeah, it's like that head knowledge kind of traveling downward into your heart. It's so hard because you can, and I think even I'm guilty of this as a writer. Sometimes you just write, "Hey, believe this." Um,
Right.
but then to pack it with that punch of actually I've lived it and I've seen it. And even when I didn't necessarily believe it deep down, God was kind enough to give me that evidence of his goodness and his kindness and his presence in the situation. So I think it's just really important even to talk about those faith struggles as well, because no one is isolated in that either. And especially when you talk about anxiety and mental health, I think there can be a lot of misconceptions and some stigma around that. And so I think it's really important to have people who can talk about it in a way that's kind and gracious, but also backed by scripture. Um, and more of like an integrated practice of scripture versus this is just a Bible verse, memorize it. It goes so much deeper than that, and it's supposed to be deeper than that. So I love just to hear how that kind of changed. And also, I think it just gives writers such freedom to keep playing around with their idea too, because I think as someone who is working on my first book, it has changed a lot from the first draft to the second draft. And that can be terrifying. And I think especially as you're working on it, you think, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? So to hear another writer talk about actually this thing changed quite a bit over the course of 6 years is really helpful because it does give us that permission and freedom of, oh, maybe this idea is just supposed to flow through me and I am listening and excavating. I think maybe it's Stephen King who says that in his book of like, it's just excavating for the bones of what the book is supposed to be. I think it's helpful to hear that it can change. It probably is supposed to change, but it's going to get richer and deeper and better and be the book it's supposed to be. So thank you for that wisdom and for your courage in going on that journey as well.
I think too, like we can almost get this angst, since the publishing world can be so slow and we think, oh, I have to hurry and get this book out before somebody else gets the idea. And then I can't. But as Ecclesiastes say, there is nothing new under the sun. There are always going to be books published about the topic you want to write on. There will always be another book about anxiety. There will always be another book about motherhood. There will always be another book about the character of God. But your unique story and your unique spin on it is what makes it a book that people want to read. You know, there are how many books on motherhood on my shelf right now, or how many books on creativity and faith, but each of them supplies me with something different. Each of them gives me a different facet of the diamond of this topic. They show me just another little angle of it, and that can make all the difference. And I think it's okay that we can remind ourselves of that. The longer this brews, the longer that this sits with me, it's going to get better. And I'm going to develop even more what that little facet of this topic is for me and how I can give the world a little bit of a slightly different angle on this topic that maybe they haven't thought about before.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important. And I think especially something I talk about with one of my writer friends a lot is you get the practice of living it. And somehow that seems to happen even on a smaller scale too. When you're about to write a blog post, suddenly the opportunity to live it is there. And there's something so important about that of no one can take away that hard-won wisdom of you living something out. No one will have that exact same experience. And I think it's just so important to remember that even when there are similar things out there, no one is you. And so your unique voice is needed and so important. And there's not a rush because there will never be another you. So thank you for that encouragement.
Of
Before we jump into the live Q&A where you can ask your questions, I would just love to know, since we're celebrating you, what has been the greatest joy of publishing this book, just so we can celebrate it with you.
I think for me, it's not necessarily hearing the people say, oh, this is such a beautiful book and you did such a great job, but it's the people who say this book or saying, oh my goodness, I felt like I was reading my story, or this came at just the right time for me, or this was such an encouragement to me. It's those stories that really encourage me as well. And it's a reminder of God is at work in this story and he is using this difficult part of my life that I went through, and he's using it to minister to others in ways that, maybe they struggled before to even talk to other people about it. But I hope that this book can lend them some courage to share someone else and maybe get some of their
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, we are celebrating your courage and all of the ways that your book has impacted people, and I know that it will continue to do that in its lifetime as well. Yeah, just such a gift to be a part of the process and to work with you as well at Calipress. And just so thankful that you and Samantha connected and were able to forge that partnership too. But yeah, I will open it up. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask away.
I have a question.
Yes,
Um, would you ever write another collection of essays on a similar or a different topic?
I've thought about it, and I really like classic literature, so maybe something like that would happen. But I don't know. I've been playing around with the idea of maybe something because yeah, there's a lot of essays I've written over the years, and I thought, oh, maybe I could do it again and like take some old stuff and refresh it, and then also add some new thoughts to it. But I don't know. I really enjoyed writing in this format. It was a really fun format to write in. And I've also heard from lots of other people that in a crazy busy life, it's nice to have it in such short, like essay format that it's easy for them to sit down and read a little bit and then put it down and not feel like they had to leave off in the midst of a chapter.
Hi, Lara.
Yes.
I'm just curious, when did you start writing?
I started writing. So, writing stories and poetry and stuff since like grade two. Um, so very early then. Then writing publicly, I started in my first year of college. So when I was about 18 or 19, I started writing on the internet and writing on my own website, and then started reaching out to some other smaller publications. And yeah, just over the years, kept persevering in it, reaching out to new publications, and slowly making friendships with other writers online. And yeah, so I would say ever since grade two, but publicly I was like 18.
Right. Did your mother write?
No, she didn't. And they'll often say, my parents will say, we have no idea where she got it from because they're not sure. My grandmother always talked about some Uncle Moses that I never met. And she said he was a writer. But I have yet to connect with any really close family members who had a passion for writing.
Thank you.
I love that. One thing that is something that I would really love to ask because you seem like you read so widely. What are, I won't ask what your favorite book is because that is always just way too difficult of a question, but
uh,
what are like top three right now that you are just loving?
Goodness, this question always stresses me out because there are so many good writers. One of those good writers just joined us, Brianna. She would be one of my favorite writers. But I'm also really enjoying take a look at my bookshelf. The moment somebody asks a question like that, my mind goes blank. Really enjoying modern authors, Kelly Kapik, James K. Smith, Andrew Wilson. Yeah, a few of those modern writers, but I'm also always in love with classics like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. I think I'd read pretty much anything they wrote. Charlotte Mason, another one that I really love because she not only writes with such wisdom, but also with such beauty. So those are a few off the top of my head, but there are so many others that I just love to read.
Yeah, well, I love that. I always love to ask that question, but I know it stresses writers out and it stresses me out too because my mind goes blank and there's so many people out there to appreciate. Um, But yeah, feel free to ask any questions. I'm so sorry you had the time wrong. But you still have a few minutes to enjoy her presence and ask away, which is a really fun portion. We also recorded this as well, so you'll be able to watch the replay too. Well, Lara,
Lara, oh,
oh, you
Yeah,
can go.
Lara, I'm just curious, when do you have time to write?
time to write. That is the question I get asked a lot with 3 little boys. So time to write usually happens in those pockets when I get an hour of screen time a day in which I try to write. I sleep miraculously. They do sleep. They go to bed at 7, and I usually will write for about an hour in the evening and then do an hour of reading. And then they also have a quiet time for an hour, which is quiet time for everybody, including mommy. And so I will sit down and try to write some then too. So little pockets of time here and there.
Thank you.
Yeah, goodness, you are a prolific writer. Yeah, what does your practice look like as well? Like, how do you kind of have that discipline to sit down and keep writing?
One of the things I've had to realize is that I can't simply write when inspiration strikes because I have only these limited moments to sit down and write. And simply, I think if you're going to make it work as a writer, you have to write when you can, whether you have the inspiration or not. And so simply sitting down and trying to write something. And sometimes writing means staring at the blinking cursor and feeling like you're going crazy because you can't think of anything. Sometimes it means writing 300 words that you will scrap tomorrow. But simply sitting down and trying to do the work, whether the inspiration is there or not. And I find it does help that, I find regularly reading helps those ideas stay there and that inspiration to be there. And simply living, as you said before, that living, doing the work of being a writer. Wendell Berry talks about that in his poem, I think it's either How to Be a Poet or How to Write a Poem. I can never remember the title, but he says, live a 3-dimensional life. And so much of the inspiration comes. And then also just jotting down those ideas. I have a notebook or I have a document for when I'm away from my notebook where I simply write down all of the ideas when they come, even if it's just a fragment of a sentence or it's story or whatever it might be, just simply scratching it down so that when I do get the time to sit down and write, I have something to work from. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of it comes from simply forcing myself to sit down and try to write something, even if the inspiration isn't there.
Those are good words. Looks like we have another question in the chat. What was your favorite chapter?
My favorite chapter, I really love the one I read tonight about nature, and just being able to reflect on, the ways that my own mom cultivated a love for nature and imagination in me. That was really, really helpful for me to read and think about how that truly has such an impact on not only my life as a writer, but also my life of faith. That, you know, the Bible says God preaches through creation. And I think having spent so much time in nature, I couldn't help but see everything from the littlest critter in the leaves to the tallest trees. There had to be someone who made all this and organized it and out of it, and that helped me become the person I am through being out in nature. Then to also think, even though sometimes nature can make me anxious for my children, realizing it is so important for them too.
I love that. Well, we are 1 minute past our time, so I will wrap us up here. But I just want to again say thank you and congratulations. I can't believe it has already been 2 months. Time just flies, especially in the spring. I don't know why. Um, but we are, yeah, just congratulating you. And again, just thank you for sharing your experiences so vulnerably and so bravely and so beautifully with your language as well. And let us know where we can find you. I think you are in on Substack. Let us know where we can continue to connect with your writing. I'm sure we are already connected with you, but if there is anything we're missing, we will go check.
Yeah, you can always find me at my website, laradontremont.com. And then you can find more of my regular personal writing at laradontremont.substack.com, where you can either just check in on the blog every now and then, or you can sign up and get what I write straight to your email inbox.
Lovely. Well, thank you. Did you have any final words before we wrap up and kind of do our send off here?
I think that's it. Just simply thank you to all of you who have supported this book, helped this dream become a reality, and just for all the love that I've had from this book. I have yet to see a scathing critical review, so that's been great. And I'm just so grateful for all the kind words and the sharing people have done to just get this book out into the world. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, continued prayers for no scathing reviews.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who joined, and I will make this recording available soon. But yeah, have a lovely night, and thank you again from me, from Calipress. Just such a gift to be able to celebrate wonderful, wonderful books being out in the world. Right? Have a great night, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.